Forget everything you think you know about truck stops. After midnight, these isolated Texas pit stops become something else entirely. Darker and far more dangerous. There are things out there that don't want to be seen. Things that don't take kindly to the living wandering into their territory. I learned that the hard way. So listen carefully, because I'm about to share the rules that kept me alive on the graveyard shift, and the ones others broke, the ones that cost them everything. My name is Daniel Reeves, and I've been working the night shift at various truck stops along Highway 83 for the past 3 years. Before you judge me for taking a job most people wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, understand this. The pay is triple what you'd make during daylight hours. And when you're drowning in medical debt from your daughter's hospital bills, you take what you can get. I thought I knew what I was signing up for. Drunks, the occasional robbery attempt, maybe some weird truckers with even weirder stories. I was wrong about all of it. The first stop they assigned me to was the Crossroads Junction, about 40 miles south of Laredo. The name should have been my first warning. Nothing good ever happens at a place called Crossroads, especially not in Texas, where the ground is soaked with more than a century of violence and broken dreams. The building itself looked like it had been assembled from spare parts of other, older structures. Corrugated metal walls painted a faded blue that was nearly gray in the moonlight. 4 gas pumps that wheezed and groaned with every transaction. A convenience store stocked with the basics. Coffee that tasted like motor oil, jerky that could double as boot leather, and enough energy drinks to keep the entire state awake for a week. My supervisor, a man named Raymond Cutler, was the one who gave me the orientation. Raymond was in his 60s, with skin like dried tobacco and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. The moment I walked through that door at 9 p.m. for my first shift, he handed me a laminated card covered in what he called the rules. I remember thinking it was some kind of hazing ritual, something to scare the new guy. I laughed. Raymond didn't. "You think this is funny?" he asked, his voice flat and cold as the tile floor beneath our feet. The last guy who thought it was funny lasted 2 weeks before he quit. Well, he didn't exactly quit. He just never came back after the incident. We found his car in the parking lot. Keys still in the ignition, engine running, door wide open. He was gone. Raymond leaned in close enough that I could smell the coffee and cigarettes on his breath. "You follow these rules, Daniel, and you might actually survive long enough to pay off those bills you're carrying. You ignore them, and you'll end up like Jimmy, or worse." The laminated card felt heavier in my hand than it should have. The rules were typed in old-fashioned typewriter font, complete with uneven letters and smudged ink. Some had been crossed out and rewritten by hand in margins. Others had been added on strips of tape, yellowed with age. There were 13 rules in total. 13. I should have walked out right then. Rule number 1 was simple enough. Never acknowledge the lights that appear in the distance between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m. Do not point at them. Do not discuss them with customers. Do not look directly at them for more than 3 seconds. I asked Raymond what kind of lights. He just shook his head. You'll know them when you see them. They're not headlights. They're not stars. They're not planes. And they're definitely not friendly. Rule number 2 made even less sense. At exactly 3:17 a.m., lock the front door and turn off the exterior lights for 7 minutes. Do not look outside during this time. Do not answer if someone knocks. Do not open the door for any reason, even if you recognize the voice calling to you. When I pressed Raymond for an explanation, he simply said, "Something passes through at that time. Every night, without fail. It's looking for a way in. The darkness and the locked door confuse it. Usually. That word hung in the air between us like smoke. Rule number 3 involved the mirrors. Every mirror in the building had to be covered between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. The bathroom mirrors, the security monitor screens, even the glass on the microwave door and the coffee pot. Raymond had assembled a collection of dark cloths specifically for this purpose. Reflections can show things that aren't really there, he explained. Or worse, things that are there but shouldn't be seen. If you see something in a mirror during those hours, do not turn around to look for it. Pretend you saw nothing and cover that mirror immediately. The rest of the rules were equally bizarre. Don't serve anyone who walks in backward. Don't sell anything from the refrigerator in the far corner after 1 a.m. because whatever's in there by that hour isn't food anymore. If you hear singing coming from storage room, turn the radio up loud enough to drown it out. Never count the vehicles in the parking lot after midnight because the number will always be wrong. If a customer asks you what year it is, tell them you don't know and immediately go to the back room until they leave. I spent my first week thinking Raymond was either insane or pulling an elaborate prank. The truck stop seemed normal enough, at least by desolate roadside establishment standards. Truckers came and went, filling their tanks and their stomachs. They were tired, sometimes cranky, but human. Normal. The quietest hours were between 2 and 4 a.m., when the highway seemed to hold its breath, and even the wind died down to nothing. Then came the 8th night, and everything changed. It started at 11:47 p.m. I was restocking the cigarette display behind the counter when I felt it. A change in the air pressure, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Through the window, I could see a truck pulling up to pump 3. It was an older model semi, the kind you don't see much anymore, with a red cab that looked black in the sodium vapor lights. The driver climbed down from the cab, and something about the way he moved made my skin crawl. His movements were too smooth, too fluid, like he was gliding rather than walking. He wore a trucker's standard uniform, jeans, boots, a flannel shirt, but I couldn't see his face. Not clearly. Every time I tried to focus on it, my eyes seemed to slide off, like trying to look at something in your peripheral vision that vanishes when you turn your head. He came inside, and the temperature dropped at least 10 degrees. I could see my breath misting in front of me. The man approached the counter, still with that strange gliding walk, and I noticed his boots weren't making any sound on the tile floor. No squeaks, no scrapes, nothing. He opened his mouth to speak, and I swear to you, his voice came from somewhere behind me, not from him at all. What year is this? My blood turned to ice water. Rule number 9. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles went white. I don't know. I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't keep track. The man's head tilted at an angle that was just wrong, too far to the left. Then he smiled, and I saw that his teeth were too white, too perfect, too many. Without another word, he turned and glided back out the door. I ran to the back room like Raymond had instructed and stayed there for 10 minutes, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might have a heart attack. When I finally emerged, the truck was gone. There was no sign it had ever been there, except for one detail that made my hands shake when I noticed it. The security camera had captured the entire encounter. I pulled up the footage, hands trembling as I worked the controls. The man was there on the video, approaching pump 3. But when he stepped into the light, the camera glitched, the image fracturing into geometric patterns. And when it cleared, the thing at the pump wasn't a man anymore. It was something tall and wrong, with too many joints in its limbs and a head that split open like a flower. I deleted that footage. I deleted it, and I never mentioned it to anyone, not even Raymond. But from that night forward, I knew the truth. The rules weren't a hazing ritual. They weren't superstition or ghost stories meant to entertain bored night shift workers. They were survival instructions for a place where the membrane between our world and something else had worn dangerously thin. The lights started appearing a few nights later. At first, I wasn't sure if I was really seeing them or if exhaustion was playing tricks with my vision. They would manifest far out in the scrubland, beyond the reach of the truck stop's lights. 3 of them, arranged in a triangle, hovering about 6 feet off the ground. They pulsed with a sick yellow-green color that reminded me of infected wounds. And they moved, slowly but deliberately, sweeping back and forth across the landscape like searchlights looking for something lost. I remembered rule number 1. Never acknowledge them. Oh my God, it was hard not to stare. There was something hypnotic about those lights, something that pulled at your attention like hooks. I forced myself to look away, to focus on restocking shelves or cleaning the coffee machine. But I could feel them out there, sense them in the same way you can sense someone staring at you from across a room. A trucker came in around 1:30 a.m., a younger guy, maybe late 20s. He was new to the route, I could tell. Too confident, too comfortable. He walked up to the counter with an energy drink and a pack of beef jerky, and I was ringing him up when he glanced out the window and froze. "Hey, what are those lights out there?" he asked, pointing toward the window. "What lights?" I replied immediately, not looking up from the register. My voice was sharper than I intended. "I don't see any lights. Those lights right there, man. 3 of them, in a triangle. They're moving. Are those drones or something?" He was already walking toward the window for a better look, and my heart nearly stopped. I practically lunged across the counter and grabbed his arm. "There are no lights," I said firmly, looking him straight in the eye. "Whatever you think you saw, you didn't see it. Pay for your stuff and get back on the road. Don't stop again until you're at least 100 miles from here." He stared at me like I'd lost my mind, but something in my expression must have gotten through to him because he paid quickly and left without another word. I watched through the window as he climbed back into his truck and pulled away, his taillights disappearing into the darkness. The 3 lights were still out there, still searching, but they hadn't moved any closer to the building. Not yet. At 3:15 a.m., I began my preparations for the nightly ritual. I turned off the exterior lights first, watching as the parking lot plunged into darkness. The lights from the highway were distant enough that they barely penetrated the gloom. Then I locked the front door, checking it twice to make sure the deadbolt had caught. Finally, I moved away from all the windows and positioned myself behind the counter where I couldn't see outside. My watch read 3:17. The 7 minutes began. The first sound came at 3:18. A scraping noise, like something dragging across the pavement outside. Then footsteps, dozens of them, all moving in perfect synchronization. They circled the building clockwise, a slow processional of something I couldn't see and didn't want to. The temperature dropped again, so cold that frost began forming on the inside of the windows. My breath came out in thick clouds. At 3:20, something knocked on the door. 3 measured raps. A pause. 3 more. The doorknob rattled, tested. Then came the voices. "Daniel? Daniel, let me in. It's Raymond. I forgot my keys." But it wasn't Raymond's voice. Not really. It was close, a good imitation, but there was something hollow about it, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Daniel, don't make me stand out here in the cold. Open the door." I pressed my back against the rear wall and covered my ears, but I could still hear it. "Your daughter needs you, Daniel. She's calling for you. Open the door and you can see her. Open the door and everything will be okay." Tears ran down my face, but I didn't move. I didn't speak. The 7 minutes stretched into eternity. At exactly 3:24 a.m., everything stopped. The footsteps ceased. The voices went silent. Even the scraping sound faded away. I waited another minute, just to be sure, then turned the exterior lights back on and unlocked the door. The parking lot was empty. The highway was quiet. Everything appeared normal, but I knew better now. This was only my second week, and I'd already encountered 3 violations of reality. How many more waited out there in the darkness? How many rules would I have to follow? And most terrifying of all, what happened to the people who broke them? I had a feeling I was going to find out. The weeks that followed my first real encounter became a blur of sleepless days and terror-filled nights. I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy during my off hours. But how do you explain to your ex-wife why you flinch at shadows, or why you started covering every mirror in your apartment? How do you tell your daughter, during your supervised weekend visits, that the monsters under the bed are real and they work the night shift just like her daddy? I couldn't. So I kept it all inside, locked away in a compartment of my mind that grew heavier with each passing shift. Raymond checked in on me occasionally, his weathered face showing something that might have been sympathy or might have been recognition. He knew what this job did to people. He'd seen it happen before, probably dozens of times. But the money kept me coming back, kept me walking through that door each night at 9 p.m., knowing full well what waited for me in those dark hours. It was during my 4th week that I met Elena Vasquez. She would start her first shift at the Dusty Rose truck stop, about 60 miles north of my location. The company sometimes had us overlap for training purposes, and I've been assigned to show her the ropes. When I arrived at the Dusty Rose just before sunset, I found her standing in the parking lot, staring at the building with an expression I recognized all too well. That mixture of determination and desperation that comes from needing a job badly enough to ignore all the warning signs. Elena was in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that had already seen their share of hardship. She'd been a nurse before the pandemic, she told me, but burnout and budget cuts had pushed her out of healthcare entirely. Now she was here, trading one kind of nightmare for another, though she didn't know it yet. I almost envied her ignorance. There was a small window, those first few days, where you could still convince yourself it was all nonsense. So, what's the real story here? She asked as we walked through the store together, and I showed her where everything was kept. Raymond gave me this card with all these weird rules, but he wouldn't really explain them. Is this some kind of test? Like, are they seeing if I'm gullible or something? I stopped in front of the covered mirrors and turned to face her. The sun was setting outside, painting the windows orange and red. Soon it would be dark, and she needed to understand before that happened. Elena, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Every single rule on that card is there for a reason. I don't understand all of them. I don't know why they work or what exactly we're protecting ourselves from. But I know that they do work, and I know what happens when people ignore them. She laughed, but it was nervous, uncertain. Come on, Daniel. You seem like a smart guy. You don't really believe in ghosts or whatever, do you? I don't know what I believe in, I replied honestly, but I know what I've seen. And I know that if you want to survive this job, you need to follow those rules exactly as they're written. Don't try to understand them. Don't try to test them. Just follow them. The look she gave me suggested she thought I was either pranking her or losing my mind. I couldn't blame her. I would have thought the same thing a month ago. But that was before I'd seen the thing at Pump 3, before I'd heard the voices at 3:17 a.m., before I'd learned that reality was far more flexible than I'd ever imagined. We made it through the evening shift without incident. Elena was competent, quick to learn, and she had the kind of calm efficiency that comes from years of dealing with medical emergencies. She didn't panic easily, which was good. She needed that quality in the hours to come. I walked her through each rule, explaining what I knew and admitting what I didn't. The lights in the distance, the locked door ritual, the covered mirrors. She nodded along, still skeptical, but at least she was listening. Around 11 p.m., things started to get strange. A pickup truck pulled up to Pump 2, and a man got out wearing clothes that looked wrong for the season. It was late October, cool enough that most people wore jackets, but this guy was dressed in heavy winter gear. Thick coat, gloves, a fur-lined hat with ear flaps. He moved slowly, like he was walking through deep snow, even though the ground was dry and clear. Should we be worried about him? Elena asked, watching through the window as the man fumbled with the gas pump, his gloved hands clumsy and uncertain. I checked the rules card, running through them in my mind. Not yet. He's not walking backward. He hasn't asked about the year. Just keep an eye on him. And whatever you do, don't comment on his clothes. The man came inside a few minutes later, and the temperature dropped just like it had with the thing from Pump 3. Elena noticed it too. I saw her wrap her arms around herself and glance at the thermostat in confusion. The man approached the counter, and I could see ice crystals forming in his beard. His skin was pale, almost blue, and his breath came out in thick clouds of vapor. Coffee, he said, his voice rough and distant. Black, hot as you can make it. I poured him a cup from the fresh pot, and when he wrapped his hands around it, steam rose up in thick plumes. He stood there for a moment, just holding the cup, and I realized he wasn't drinking it. He was just absorbing the heat, like a man who'd been freezing for a very long time. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were the pale blue of deep ice, and there was something ancient and sad in them. How long? He asked quietly. I don't know. I replied, following my instincts. I can't help you with that. He nodded slowly, set down the cup, and walked back out into the night. He got into his truck and drove away, heading north on the highway. Elena stared at me, her face pale. What the hell was that? That man was hypothermic. We should have called an ambulance. He could die out there. He's already dead, I said softly. Has been for a while, I think. We just gave him a moment of warmth. That's all we can do. She wanted to argue. I could see it in her eyes, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the certainty in my voice. Maybe it was the lingering cold in the air. Or maybe on some deep instinctive level, she'd recognized the truth of what that man was. We didn't speak about it for the rest of the night, but I noticed she held that rules card a little tighter after that. The real trouble started 3 nights later, when Elena was working alone. I found out about it the next evening when Raymond called me in early. His voice on the phone was tight, controlled, but I could hear the worry underneath. We got a situation at the Dusty Rose. Elena's refusing to work tonight. Says she saw something. I need you to go up there and talk to her. Find out what happened. I made the drive in record time, my mind racing through possibilities. Had she looked at the lights? Had she forgotten to lock the door at 3:17? Had she uncovered one of the mirrors? When I arrived, I found her sitting in her car in the parking lot, still in her work uniform, staring at the building like it might come alive and swallow her whole. I knocked on her window, and she jumped, then relaxed slightly when she saw it was me. She rolled down the window, but didn't get out. I can't go back in there, Daniel. I can't. What I saw, what happened? Tell me, I said, crouching down beside her car. Whatever it is, I need to know. Not for the company, for you, so I can help you understand. She took a shaky breath and began talking. It had happened around 1:45 a.m. She'd been following all the rules. She swore, being careful about everything. But she'd been cleaning the coffee station and had accidentally knocked over the cloth covering the microwave door. Just for a second, maybe 2, the glass was exposed. And in that brief moment, she'd seen something in the reflection. It was standing right behind me. She whispered, her voice breaking. But when I turned around, nothing was there. So I looked back at the microwave, and it was still in the reflection. This tall thing, with skin like old leather and hands that were too long. It was just standing there, watching me. And then it smiled, and Daniel, its mouth opened too wide, like a snake unhinging its jaw. I felt ice forming in my stomach. What did you do? I covered the glass again, fast as I could. And then I heard this sound, like something scraping against the floor, moving away. I ran to the back room and stayed there until sunrise. I didn't come out for anything, not even when I heard the front door chime, not even when I heard footsteps. I just stayed there, in the dark, waiting for morning. You did the right thing, I told her, though my mind was racing. You saw it, but you didn't engage with it. You covered the mirror and removed yourself from the situation. That's exactly what you should have done. But what was it? She demanded, her eyes wide and desperate. What are these things? Why are they here? And why the hell are we just serving coffee and selling lottery tickets like this is normal? I didn't have good answers for her. I still don't. But I told her what Raymond had told me, what I'd come to understand through my own experiences. The truck stops are in between places. Not quite anywhere, not quite nowhere. They exist in the gaps, on the margins, where the normal world gets thin. Things gather in places like that. Old things, hungry things, things that used to have more room to roam before highways and cities carved up the landscape. Now they're compressed into these little pockets, these thin spaces, and we're the ones who have to work around them. That's insane, she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. That's absolutely insane. Yeah, I agreed. It is, but it's also true. And knowing that, understanding that, makes it survivable. The rules work, Elena. They're not perfect, but they work. That thing in the mirror, it couldn't touch you. It could only watch. And once you cover the glass again, it had to leave. That's the power of the rules. They create boundaries these things can't cross. She was quiet for a long time, staring at the truck stop. The sun was setting again, and soon it would be time for the night shift to begin. I don't know if I can do this, she finally said. You don't have to, I replied. There are other jobs. Worse paying, but safer. Less likely to drive you insane. But if you do stay, if you need this money badly enough, then I'll help you. I'll check in every night. We'll work through this together. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I wonder what she saw. A man who'd been changed by this place, marked by it in ways I probably didn't even recognize yet. Someone who'd crossed over from skepticism to belief and was still paying the price for that journey. But maybe she also saw someone who'd survived, who'd learned to navigate this strange and terrible world, and was still standing. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, but Daniel, I need you to promise me something. If I start to become like them, like those things, you'll tell me. You'll make me quit before it's too late. I promised, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. How would I know when someone had crossed that line? How would I recognize the moment when a person stopped being human and became something else? But she needed to hear it, so I said the words, and she got out of her car. We walked in the dusty rows together as the last light faded from the sky. The building looked different in the twilight, more solid somehow, more real. That was always the trick of these places. They seemed most normal right at the threshold, right at that moment. When day turned to night, it was only later, in the deepest hours, that they revealed their true nature. Elena made it through that shift, and the next, and the one after that. She was careful, meticulous about following every rule. But I could see it taking its toll on her, the same way it had taken its toll on me. The shadows under her eyes grew darker. Her hands developed a slight tremor that never quite went away. She started talking less, spending more time just staring out the windows at the darkness beyond. Then came the night that changed everything, the night that taught me the most important lesson of all. The rules could protect you from a lot of things, but they couldn't protect you from yourself. It was a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Elena's encounter with the thing in the mirror. I was working at Crossroads Junction when I got a call from the Dusty Rose. It was Elena, and I could hear the panic in her voice even before she spoke. Daniel, I messed up. I messed up bad. I need help. What happened? I asked, already grabbing my keys. Are you hurt? I challenged them, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The lights, the ones in the distance, they've been getting closer every night, and I got angry. I got so tired of being afraid, of following all these rules, of living in terror. So tonight, when they appeared, I went outside and I yelled at them. I told them either come get me or leave me alone. I told them I wasn't afraid anymore. My blood went cold. Elena, get inside. Lock the doors. Cover the windows. I'm on my way. Daniel, they're coming. All 3 of them, moving toward the building. And there's something else with them now. Something bigger. I can hear it out there, breathing. What do? Follow the emergency protocol, I said, driving as fast as I dared on the dark highway. Raymond should have shown you. There's a safe room in the back, behind the storage area. Seal yourself in there, and don't come out until sunrise. No matter what you hear, no matter what calls your name. The line went dead. I pushed my car harder, the engine screaming, watching the mile markers blur past. The Dusty Rose was 40 minutes away under normal circumstances. I made it in 25, running red lights and stop signs in the small towns along the way. When I pulled into the parking lot, I knew immediately that something was wrong. The exterior lights were all off. The building sat in complete darkness except for a faint, sickly green glow coming from inside. The 3 lights hung in the air about 50 feet from the front door, arranged in their perfect triangle, pulsing slowly. And between them and the building stood something that made my mind revel against seeing it clearly. It was tall, impossibly tall, with a body that seemed to shift and change shape as I looked at it. One moment it appeared almost human. The next it was something angular and insectoid, all sharp edges and too many joints. It stood perfectly still, facing the building, and I realized it was waiting to be invited in, waiting for permission to cross the threshold. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from my trunk, the one Raymond had given me for emergencies, and approached the building from the side. The thing didn't react to my presence, didn't acknowledge me at all. Its attention was fixed entirely on the door, on whatever was inside. I could hear a sound coming from it, a low thrumming that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The side entrance was locked, but I had the master key. I let myself in as quietly as possible and immediately headed for the back room. The store was a disaster. Shelves had been knocked over, products scattered everywhere. The register was open, money spilled across the floor, and every single mirror, every reflective surface was uncovered. In each one, I could see dozens of figures standing throughout the store, though when I looked directly, the space was empty. "Elena," I called out, keeping my voice low. "Elena, where are you?" A sound came from the safe room, a whimper or a sob. I rushed to the door and found it sealed from the inside, just as it should be. "Elena, it's Daniel. I'm here. Open up." "I can't," she said, her voice muffled through the heavy door. "It's not safe. They're everywhere. They're in all the mirrors and that thing outside. It keeps calling my name. It sounds like my mother, Daniel. It sounds exactly like her. Don't listen to it," I said firmly. "Whatever it sounds like, it's not her. It's not anything you know. I'm going to fix this, okay? I'm going to make it safe. But I need you to stay in there, no matter what you hear. Can you do that?" "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." I spent the next hour covering every mirror and reflective surface I could find. The figures in the reflections watched me work, their faces expressionless, their eyes following my every movement. Some of them looked almost human. Others were clearly not, their proportions wrong, their features distorted into nightmare shapes. When I covered the last mirror, I felt a shift in the air, like a door slamming shut somewhere far away. The thrumming sound stopped. I looked out the front window and saw that the lights had retreated, moving back toward their usual position in the distance. The tall thing was gone, though I couldn't say whether it had left or simply faded away. The parking lot was empty again, silent again, the normal sounds of the highway returning like a held breath finally released. I opened the safe room door and found Elena curled up in the corner, her eyes red from crying, her whole body shaking. I helped her up and guided her out to my car. She didn't speak the entire drive to her apartment, and I didn't push her. Some experiences go beyond words, beyond the ability to process or explain. She called Raymond the next day and quit. I don't blame her. She'd learned the hardest lesson of all. The rules weren't just suggestions or superstitions. They were a contract, a carefully negotiated peace treaty between us and the things that shared these spaces. Breaking them didn't just put you in danger. It invited those things in, gave them permission to cross boundaries that usually held firm. But here's what really kept me awake for days afterward. When I was covering those mirrors, when I was seeing all those figures reflected in the glass, I recognized one of them. Standing in the back corner, barely visible, was Jimmy, the guy who disappeared 2 months before I started, the one whose car had been found running with the door open. He was there, in the reflection, and he looked directly at me with eyes that held an expression I couldn't quite read. Recognition, maybe, or warning, or regret. The rules protected us from them. But who protected us from becoming them? That was the question that haunted me as I drove back to Crossroads Junction that night, knowing I still had a shift to complete, knowing I'd be back tomorrow and the day after that. Because the debt collectors didn't care about trauma or terror. The hospital bills didn't stop coming just because you'd glimpsed the truth behind reality. So I kept working. I kept following the rules. And I kept waiting for the night when I'd look in a covered mirror and see my own face staring back from the wrong side of the glass. November brought early cold to Texas, the kind that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. It also brought an increase in activity at the truck stops, as if the dropping temperatures somehow energized the things that lurked in the darkness. Raymond mentioned it during one of his rare visits to Crossroads Junction, his breath fogging in the air despite the heater running full blast. "Winter's always worse," he said, warming his hands on a cup of coffee. "Don't know why. Maybe it's the longer nights. Maybe it's because people are more desperate, more likely to take risks to get somewhere warm. Or maybe those things just like the cold. They certainly seem more active once the temperature drops. I've been on the job for 2 months by then, and I'd developed a routine that kept me relatively sane. Follow the rules without question. Don't try to understand or explain. Keep your head down, do your job, and get out before sunrise." It wasn't much of a life, but it was life, which was more than could be said for some of the others who'd worked these shifts. That's when Raymond told me about Jack Thornton and the phenomenon that had become known among the night shift workers as the vanishing trucker. It was a story that got passed around whenever new people joined the company, part warning, part legend, part evidence that breaking the rules had consequences that went beyond simple danger. Jack had been working the overnight shift at a truck stop called Desert's Edge, about 100 miles west of where I was stationed. This was back in 2019, before the pandemic, when the company was still expanding and hiring anyone willing to work the weird hours. Jack was a former long-haul trucker himself, someone who knew the roads and the culture, which made him a natural fit for the job, or so everyone thought. The problem with Jack was that he didn't believe in the rules. Not really. He saw them as corporate liability theater, a way for the company to cover themselves legally if anything went wrong. He'd made jokes about them during his training, laughed them off whenever someone tried to explain their importance. And for the first few weeks, nothing happened to challenge his skepticism. The job was just a job, boring, lonely, and uneventful. Then came the night a trucker pulled up in a rig that looked like it had driven straight out of the 1970s. Everything about the truck was wrong for the modern era. The rounded cab design, the paint job, the lack of modern safety features. But it was the driver that really caught Jack's attention. The man who climbed down from that cab looked wrong in a way that was hard to define. His clothes were period appropriate, his appearance unremarkable, but there was something off about his movements, like he was operating on a slight delay, his body catching up to his intentions a fraction of a second too late. The trucker came inside and asked Jack what year it was. Rule number 9, the one I'd encountered in my first week. Jack, being Jack, answered honestly. "It's 2019, he said. November 18th, 2019, to be exact. You feeling all right, buddy? Maybe been on the road too long." The trucker had stared at him for a long moment, his face expressionless. Then he'd asked another question. "How long have I been driving?" Jack had shrugged, still not understanding that he was having a conversation that should never have happened. "How should I know? But if you need a rest, there's a motel about 10 miles up the road. You look like you could use some sleep." The trucker had nodded slowly, paid for his gas in cash that smelled like mildew and decay, and walked back out to his rig. Jack had watched him drive away, heading north on the highway, and thought nothing more of it. Just another weird encounter on a weird shift. The next night, the same trucker appeared. Same old rig, same outdated clothes, same delayed movements. He came inside and asked Jack the same question. "What year is this?" This time, Jack felt a prickle of unease. He remembered the rule, remembered the warnings, but he'd already answered once. What harm could it do to answer again? "It's 2019, he said. "November 19th now. We spoke last night, remember?" The trucker tilted his head, and Jack later said that was when he first noticed the man's eyes. They were wrong, he told Raymond. Too pale, too empty, like looking into windows of an abandoned house. "I don't remember last night," the trucker said slowly. "I don't remember anything except driving. Always driving. How long have I been driving?" Jack had no answer for that. The trucker paid for his gas again, this time in coins that were tarnished nearly black, and left. Jack watched the old rig pull back on a highway, and this time he felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd made a mistake, he realized. He'd violated the rule, not once but twice. And something was wrong with that trucker, something fundamentally broken about him. The third night, the rig appeared again. But this time, when the trucker climbed down from a cab, Jack noticed something that made his blood run cold. The man was wearing the same clothes as the previous 2 nights, right down to the same tear in his shirt sleeve, the same grease stain on his jeans. And when he walked, his boots made no sound at all on the pavement. The trucker came inside, and Jack could see that he looked more substantial somehow, more present, as if answering the question had given him weight, given him reality. "What year is this?" the trucker asked again, and this time his voice was stronger, more certain. Jack refused to answer. He just shook his head and backed away from the counter. "I can't help you," he said, finally understanding the rule, finally grasping its importance. The trucker's face twisted into an expression of confusion and rage. "You helped me before. You told me before. Why won't you help me now? I need to know. How long have I been lost? How long have I been driving this road?" Jack had run to the back room and locked himself in, just like Elena had done. He stayed there until sunrise, listening to the trucker pacing outside, his footsteps growing heavier and more real with each pass. When dawn finally broke and Jack emerged, the store was empty, but written on the front window, in what looked like condensation but didn't fade even after Jack tried to wipe it away, were the words, "Help me remember." That should have been the end of it. Jack should have quit, should have recognized that he'd narrowly escaped something terrible. But the encounter had left him unsettled in a different way. He couldn't stop thinking about the trucker, about those empty eyes, and that desperate question. How long have I been driving? Jack started researching, digging through old accident reports and missing person cases from the highways around Desert's Edge. He found what he was looking for in a newspaper archive from 1974. A trucker named Robert Fenway had vanished while making a run from Amarillo to El Paso. His rig had been found abandoned on the side of the highway, engine still running, door wide open. No blood, no signs of struggle, no explanation. Robert Fenway had simply disappeared, leaving behind a wife and 2 young daughters. The case had never been solved. The description of Robert Fenway matched the trucker Jack had encountered. Same age, same build, same distinguishing features, which meant that the man who'd been asking Jack about the year had been dead or missing or lost for 45 years. And by answering his question, by acknowledging him and giving him information, Jack had somehow made him more real, more present, more able to interact with the world. Jack became obsessed with the story. He started breaking other rules deliberately, trying to understand them, trying to find patterns or explanations. He stopped covering the mirrors. He looked directly at the lights in the distance. He opened the door during the 3:17 a.m. ritual. Nothing happened to him, at least not right away, and that only made him bolder. He started to believe he'd figured something out, that the rules were more like guidelines, that knowing the truth behind them gave you power over them. He was wrong, of course. He was wrong in the most fundamental way possible. It happened on a Friday night, 3 weeks after his first encounter with Robert Fenway's ghost, or echo, or whatever it was. Jack was working alone at Desert's Edge when a customer came in around 2 a.m. The customer was unremarkable, just a regular guy stopping for coffee and a bathroom break. But when he came back from the restroom, he looked confused and concerned. "Hey, there's someone in your storage room," he told Jack. "I heard them singing back there. Sounds like a woman, but the song's kind of weird. You might want to check on her." Rule number 7. If you hear singing coming from the storage room, turn the radio up loud enough to drown it out. Never go investigate. Never try to find the source. Just cover it with noise and wait for it to stop. But Jack had stopped following the rules. He told the customer everything was fine, that it was probably just the radio, and then he did exactly what he shouldn't have done. He went to investigate. The customer left a few minutes later. The security footage shows him driving away, his taillights disappearing into the darkness. And then, for exactly 17 seconds, the footage glitches. Visual static, like the camera was trying to record something it couldn't process. When the image cleared, Jack was gone. Just gone. The store was empty. The storage room door standing open, darkness spilling out of it like liquid. Raymond was the one who found the scene the next morning. The store looked normal enough, except for that open storage room door and a smell in the air that he described as ancient and hungry. Jack's car was still in the parking lot, keys in his pocket, phone on the counter. But Jack himself had vanished as completely as Robert Fenway had 45 years earlier. The singing started appearing at other truck stops after that. Workers would hear it, faint and distant, coming from storage rooms or utility closets, or sometimes just from the spaces between walls. It was always the same melody, Raymond said, though the words were in a language nobody recognized. And if you listen carefully, really carefully, you could hear a second voice underneath the singing. A man's voice, screaming. "That's why we tell everyone to drown it out," Raymond finished, setting down his empty coffee cup. Whatever took Jack, it's still hungry, and it's still singing, looking for the next person curious enough or foolish enough to come find it. I felt sick to my stomach. Does the company know about this? About what really happened to Jack? Raymond laughed, but there was no humor in it. The company knows exactly what it needs to know. Jack Thornton was a troubled employee who abandoned his post. They've got his resignation letter on file, though of course Jack never actually wrote it. Insurance paid out, case closed, everyone moves on. That's how it works in this business. People disappear, and we fill their shifts, and the trucks keep rolling through the night. After Raymond left, I stood behind the counter and stared out at the empty parking lot. I thought about Robert Fenway, driving the same stretch of highway for 45 years, unable to remember when or why he'd started, unable to stop. I thought about Jack Thornton, too curious for his own good, now trapped somewhere singing songs he didn't know in a voice that wasn't quite his anymore. I thought about all the others who'd vanished over the years, leaving nothing behind but warnings and rules written on laminated cards. The worst part was knowing it would keep happening. People would keep taking these jobs because they needed the money. They'd keep breaking the rules because they were human, and humans are naturally curious, naturally rebellious, naturally convinced that the bad things happen to other people, but never to them. And the things that lived in the spaces between, they'd keep taking what they were given, keep adding to their collection of lost souls and forgotten voices. That night, around 1:30 a.m., I heard singing, faint and distant, coming from somewhere in the back of the building. My hand was already moving toward the radio before I consciously registered the sound. I turned the volume up until the storage room voice was drowned out by classic rock, and I kept it there for the rest of my shift. I didn't investigate. I didn't even let myself think about it too hard. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious. If I said some part of me didn't want to know what was back there, what had taken Jack, what those songs meant. That's the real danger of this job, I realized. Not the things themselves, but the way they make you curious. The way they make you want to understand, to know, to peek behind the curtain at the machinery of the universe. Curiosity killed the cat, they say, but it did worse things to truck stop workers. 2 weeks after Raymond told me about Jack, I had my own encounter with the vanishing trucker phenomenon. It was a slow night, The kind where minutes stretched into hours and the darkness outside the windows seemed to press against the glass like it was looking for a way in. Around 1 a.m., a rig pulled into the lot. It wasn't quite as old as the one from Jack's story, maybe from the early 2000s, but it had that same feeling of wrongness about it, like it was slightly out of phase with reality, occupying space without quite belonging to it. The driver who came inside was a woman this time, which surprised me. She was maybe 50, with steel gray hair and the kind of weathered face that comes from years on the road. She moved with that same delayed quality I'd heard described, her body and her intentions not quite synchronized. When she looked at me, her eyes were the color of fog, pale and empty and cold. "What year is this?" she asked, and I felt my heart hammer in my chest. "I don't know," I said, the words coming out automatically. "I don't keep track of that kind of thing." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see confusion rippling across her face. "But I need to know. I have a delivery to make. I'm supposed to be in Houston by Friday, but I don't remember what Friday. I don't remember when I started driving. Help me, please." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to answer her, to help this poor lost woman who clearly needed assistance. But I thought about Robert Fenway, driving for 45 years. I thought about Jack Thornton, singing in the darkness. I thought about all the rules and all the reasons behind them, written in the blood and disappearances of everyone who'd come before me. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I can't help you. You should go. Just go." She stood there for another minute, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. Then, without a word, she turned and walked back out to her rig. I watched through the window as she climbed into the cab and pulled back onto the highway, heading south. The taillights faded into the darkness, and I wondered how long she'd been driving. How long she'd continue to drive, stopping at random truck stops throughout the Southwest, asking the same question, never getting an answer, never finding whatever it was she'd lost. I felt like I'd failed some basic test of humanity, but I'd also survived the night, which was more than could be said for Jack. Sometimes survival means making choices that sit heavy on your conscience. Sometimes staying alive means learning to live with the weight of all the people you couldn't help, all the questions you couldn't answer, all the rules you followed even when they felt cruel. The singing from the storage room was louder after she left, as if her visit had somehow energized whatever was back there. I turned the radio up even higher and tried not to think about what those songs meant, what they were calling for, what they promised to anyone foolish enough to listen. 3 hours later, when my shift ended and the sun began painting the eastern sky pink and gold, I walked out to my car and sat there for a long moment before starting the engine. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't make them stop. This was becoming routine, this post-shift adrenaline crash, this flood of delayed fear that hit once I was safely away from the building. How long could a person sustain this? How long before the constant stress wore through whatever made me human and left something else in its place? I thought about calling Elena, checking in to see how she was doing. But it was too early, and besides, what would I say? That I'd encountered another lost soul tonight? That I'd refused to help someone who desperately needed it? That I was starting to wonder if the things in the darkness weren't the only monsters in this story? Instead, I drove home in silence, the radio off, just the sound of my tires on asphalt and my own breathing. When I finally collapsed into bed, I dreamed of highways that went on forever, of endless roads under starless skies, of driving and never arriving anywhere at all. The vanishing trucker phenomenon became more frequent after that. Over the next few weeks, I encountered 3 more lost drivers, each one asking the same question, each one clearly stuck in some loop they couldn't escape. An old man in a truck from the 1980s, a young guy who couldn't have been more than 25, his rig covered in decals from companies that had gone bankrupt decades ago. A middle-aged couple who shared driving duties, both of them wearing matching expressions of confusion and desperate hope. I refused to answer any of them. I followed the rule. even as it tore at something inside me. Even as I watched them drive away, back onto highways that led nowhere, back into the endless loop of their own personal hells. Because answering wouldn't help them. Jack had proven that. Answering only made them more real, more trapped, more present in a world they no longer belonged to. But here's what I started to notice. The ones I refused were gone by the next night. They'd move on to another truck stop, another desperate question, another worker who might or might not follow the rules. But the ones that other workers had answered, the ones that had been acknowledged and given information, they started appearing more frequently. Robert Fenway showed up at 3 different truck stops in 1 week, his presence growing stronger each time, his question more demanding. It was like we were feeding them somehow. Every time someone broke the rule, every time someone answered the question, these lost drivers gained a little more purchase on reality. They became more solid, more substantial, more able to interact with the world. And that was dangerous, though I couldn't quite articulate why. It just felt wrong, like watching something dead slowly crawl back to life. Raymond confirmed my suspicions during our next check-in. "They're getting stronger," he said, his face grim. "Robert Fenway actually touched someone last week, grabbed her arm when she tried to walk away without answering. Left a bruise that lasted for days. First time I've ever heard of one of them being able to make physical contact. What happens if they get strong enough?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Raymond lit a cigarette, even though smoking wasn't allowed in the building, and took a long drag. "I don't know. Nobody knows. But I've got a theory. I think they're trying to become real again, trying to claw their way back into the world by getting people to acknowledge them, to give them substance through recognition and interaction. And if they succeed," he trailed off, shaking his head. "If they succeed, I think they'll need to displace someone, take their place, become them. Like Jack," I said quietly. Maybe that's what happened to him. Maybe he didn't just disappear into the storage room. Maybe something was waiting there, something that had been gathering strength for years. And when he gave it enough attention, enough reality, it was finally strong enough to make a trade. His substance for its freedom. We sat in silence for a while, the implications settling over us like snow. If Raymond was right, then every time we encountered one of these lost drivers, we were participating in something far more dangerous than a simple haunting. We were potentially helping something dead or displaced claw its way back into the living world, and the cost of that return would be measured in human lives. "There's something else," Raymond said, grinding out his cigarette. "We're starting to see workers go missing during their shifts. Not disappearing entirely like Jack, but just wandering off. They'll go to take out the trash or check on something in the parking lot, and they just don't come back. We find them hours later, sometimes miles away, walking along the highway with no memory of how they got there or why they left. And when we ask them what happened, they all say the same thing. They heard someone calling their name, someone they knew, someone they trusted. The things they're learning," I said, understanding flooding through me. "They're adapting, finding new ways to get to us." Exactly. The rules were written based on observed patterns, on what worked before. But these things, they're not static. They're evolving, finding weaknesses in our defenses, which means the rules might not always be enough. That thought haunted me more than any of the actual encounters. The rules have become my lifeline, my protection, my way of making sense of the senseless. But if they were becoming obsolete, if the things we were dealing with were learning and adapting faster than we could update our protocols, then what hope did any of us have? I started carrying a notebook with me to work, documenting every strange occurrence, every unusual encounter, looking for new patterns. Other workers were doing the same thing. I discovered there was an unofficial network of night shift employees who shared information through encrypted messaging apps, warning each other about new phenomena, discussing theories, trying to stay ahead of whatever was happening. That's how I learned about the incident at mile marker 247, a truck stop that had been closed for renovations 3 weeks earlier. A worker there had encountered what he thought was the vanishing trucker phenomenon. He followed the rule, refused to answer the question about the year. But then the driver had smiled and said, "That's okay. I don't need to know anymore. I remember now. I remember everything." And then the driver had changed. Right there in the store, in full view of the security cameras, he had shed his human appearance like a snake shedding skin. What emerged was something that the worker described as all wrong angles and hungry eyes and a mouth that opened in directions mouths shouldn't open. The worker had run, had made it to his car, had driven away, and never looked back. The truck stop was closed the next day, and according to the rumors, it would never reopen. Whatever had been wearing the trucker's face was still inside, waiting. The story spread through our informal network like wildfire, and with it came a chilling realization. We weren't just dealing with ghosts or lost souls or echoes of the past. We were dealing with something that could pretend to be those things, that used our assumptions and our rules against us. Something that was hunting us specifically, that had learned patience and mimicry and exactly how to exploit the gaps in our defenses. I thought about quitting every single day. I'd wake up in the afternoon, my body still thrumming with residual adrenaline from the night before, and I'd tell myself that today was the day I'd turn in my resignation. But then I'd check my bank account and see my daughter's hospital bills, and I'd think about how much longer I needed to work to pay them off, and I'd convince myself I could survive one more shift. Just one more. That's how they get you, I realized. Not through sudden violence or dramatic confrontations, but through slow erosion, through the daily choice to return to a place that's killing you by degrees because the alternative is somehow worse. The things in the darkness didn't need to attack us directly. They just needed to wait while we destroyed ourselves trying to survive. On a cold night in early December, exactly 3 months after I'd started working at Crossroads Junction, I had an encounter that changed everything. It was 2:47 a.m., and I was in the middle of restocking the drink coolers when I heard the front door chime. I looked up to see a man walking in, and my breath caught in my throat. He looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, same features. He was even wearing clothes similar to what I had on. He walked up to the counter with that familiar delayed movement, that out-of-sync quality I'd come to recognize. And when he looked at me, his eyes were my eyes, but empty. "Hello, Dad. What year is this?" he asked in my voice. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at this impossible reflection, this doppelganger that shouldn't exist. This was me, but it wasn't me. It was something wearing my face, using my voice, occupying space in my shape. "What year is this?" It asked again, more insistently. I thought about Raymond's theory, about things trying to claw their way back into reality by displacing someone, about taking someone's place, becoming them. Was this what I would become if I stayed here too long? Was this my future, or my past, or some quantum possibility made manifest? I don't know. I finally managed to say, my voice barely audible, "I can't help you." The thing that looked like me tilted its head, and a slow smile spread across its face. My face. "That's okay," it said. "I'll remember eventually. We always do. See you again soon, Daniel." It walked out, climbed into a truck I hadn't seen pull up, and drove away. But here's what made me finally understand the true horror of my situation. When I checked the security footage later, the camera hadn't recorded anyone entering or leaving. As far as the video was concerned, I'd been alone in the store the entire time. I'd been talking to empty air, or talking to myself. I called Raymond immediately, not caring that it was 3 a.m. "I need to talk to you," I said when he answered, my voice shaking. "Right now. It's important." We met in an all-night diner 30 miles from the nearest truck stop, a brightly lit place full of normal people having normal late-night meals. The fluorescent lighting felt like a blessing after months of sodium vapor and darkness. I told him everything, and he listened without interrupting, his face growing graver with each word. When I finished, He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Daniel, I need to ask you something. I need you to answer honestly. When did you start working for us? What month? What day?" "September," I said automatically. "September 15th. "What?" He pulled out his phone and showed me something on the screen. It was a company personnel file. My file. But the start date listed was March 15th, 6 months earlier than I remembered. And the photo on the file, the one that was supposed to be my employee ID picture, showed me looking hollow-eyed and exhausted, like I'd been working there for years instead of months. "Daniel," Raymond said gently, "I think you need to consider the possibility that you've been here longer than you remember. That's one of the warning signs. Memory inconsistencies, time dilation, losing track of days or weeks. It means the place is starting to claim you. It means you're running out of time." I wanted to argue, to insist that he was wrong, that I knew exactly how long I'd been working there. But I couldn't, because when I really tried to remember my first shift, tried to recall specific details, everything was fuzzy, uncertain, like trying to remember a dream weeks after waking up. How many nights had I worked? How many encounters had I survived? How many times had I followed the rules, and how many times had I come close to breaking them? "What do?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "You quit," Raymond said simply. "Tonight. Right now. You walk away, and you don't look back. Whatever you're running from, whatever debts you're carrying, they're not worth this. Nothing is worth this. But the hospital bills will still be there whether you're alive or dead, whether you're yourself or something else wear your skin. Daniel, listen to me. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've seen dozens of people come through, and I've watched what this work does to them. The ones who survive are the ones who know when to quit. The ones who recognize the warning signs and get out before it's too late. You've just seen yourself, your future self, or your replacement, or whatever the hell that thing was. That's the universe giving you a chance. Don't waste it." I want to take his advice. I wanted to walk away right then and never return to Crossroads Junction or any other truck stop. But there was something he didn't know, something I'd been keeping to myself. The medical debt wasn't just for my daughter's past treatments. She needed surgery, expensive surgery that insurance wouldn't fully cover, and she needed it within the next 6 months. Without this job, without this money, she wouldn't get that surgery. And without that surgery, I couldn't finish that thought. Wouldn't finish it. "I can't quit yet," I told Raymond. 3 more months. That's all I need. 3 more months, and I'll have enough saved up. Then I'm done. I promise. The look he gave me was full of pity and understanding and resignation. "That's what they all say," he whispered. "That's what Jack said. 3 more months. Just a little longer. Just until I've saved enough or paid off enough or earned enough. But the thing about this job, Daniel, is that 3 months can stretch into 3 years if you're not careful. Or it can compress into 3 days. Time doesn't work right in those places. You know that. You felt it. He was right, and I knew he was right, but I couldn't make myself care enough to change my decision. My daughter's face, pale in a hospital bed, had more reality to me than anything else. More reality than rules or warnings or doppelgangers in the night. 3 months, I repeated. "That's all." Raymond sighed and stood up, throwing some bills on the table for a coffee. "Then let me give you one more piece of advice. Don't work alone anymore. Get someone to partner with you, someone who can watch your back and keep you grounded. The isolation is what gets people in the end. The sense that you're the only real thing in a world of ghosts. Having someone else there, someone to remind you who you are, that can make all the difference." He left me sitting in that diner, surrounded by normal people living normal lives, and I wondered if I'd ever be able to join them again, or if I'd already crossed some invisible line, already become something other, something between, something that only looked human in the right light. I went back to work that night. What else could I do? And when I walked through the door of Crossroads Junction at 9 p.m., I felt the building recognize me, felt it welcome me back like an old friend, or like a trap welcoming its prey. The vanishing trucker phenomenon had evolved. We all were starting to understand that now. It wasn't just lost souls asking questions anymore. It was something learning about us, studying us, finding the cracks in our armor. And my armor, I realized, had a crack shaped exactly like a little girl in a hospital bed, and whatever was out there in the darkness had found it. Raymond's warning about working alone stuck with me, so I convinced the company to let me overlap shifts with a new hire named Marcus Chun. Marcus was a former EMT who'd burned out during the pandemic, another refugee from a normal life looking for quick money in all the wrong places. He was practical, calm under pressure, and most importantly, he believed in the rules from day one. He'd had an uncle who worked night shifts at a truck stop in New Mexico, and that uncle had shared enough stories to make Marcus a believer before he ever walked through our door. Having a partner changed the dynamic of the work. We could cover for each other during the 3:17 a.m. ritual, could verify what the other person was seeing, could provide that crucial reminder of reality that Raymond had mentioned. It helped, at least for a while. But it also meant that when things went wrong, they went wrong for both of us. It was Marcus who first encountered what we came to call the silent hitchhiker, though the phenomenon had been happening for years before we named it. It was a Wednesday night, early December, the kind of cold that makes your joints ache and your breath visible even indoors. Marcus had gone out to help a customer with a diesel pump that was malfunctioning, leaving me alone inside for about 10 minutes. When he came back in, he looked shaken, not terrified, not panicked, but definitely unsettled in a way I hadn't seen from him before. He poured himself a coffee with hands that trembled just slightly and stood by the counter for a moment before speaking. "There's someone sitting in that customer's truck," he said quietly. "Passenger seat." But the driver came in alone, and I watched him walk directly from the pump to the bathroom. Nobody else got out of that truck. Nobody got in. I felt my stomach tighten. Did the driver mention having a passenger? No. And that's the thing. When I pointed it out to him, asked if his buddy needed anything, he looked at me like I was crazy. Said he'd been driving solo for 3 days. "But Daniel, I'm telling you, there's someone in that truck. I can see them through the window. Just sitting there. Not moving. Not looking at anything. Just sitting." We both moved to the window and looked out at the truck in question. It was a standard commercial 18-wheeler. Nothing unusual about it. The driver was still inside using the facilities. And in the passenger seat, clearly visible in the harsh parking lot lights, sat a figure. It was hard to make out details from this distance, but the figure appeared to be male, wearing dark clothing, facing forward. Completely still, unnaturally still. No breathing movements, no small shifts in position, no fidgeting or adjusting. Just perfect, absolute stillness. Maybe it's a mannequin, Marcus suggested without conviction. Some truckers keep them for company, or to make it look like there are 2 people in the cab for safety. Maybe, I said, but I didn't believe it. There was something wrong about that figure, something that made my primitive hindbrain scream warnings, even though I couldn't articulate what the danger was. The driver came out of the bathroom, bought his coffee and snacks, and headed back to his truck. We watched from the window as he climbed into the cab. He settled into the driver's seat, adjusted his mirrors, started the engine. The figure in the passenger seat never moved, never acknowledged him. The driver never acknowledged it either, never looked at it, never seemed to register its presence at all. The truck pulled out and merged back onto the highway, heading north. Marcus and I stood there for a long moment, not speaking, both of us trying to process what we'd seen. "That's happened before," I finally said. "I've seen it. Other workers have reported it. The silent passenger. They're always in the passenger seat, always perfectly still, always invisible to the driver. And they always appear at night, on long-haul routes, when the driver has been on the road for more than 12 hours. What are they?" Marcus asked. "I don't know. Ghosts of hitchhikers past. Some kind of road spirit. Or maybe..." I paused, a terrible thought occurring to me. Maybe they're what happens to drivers who break the rules. Maybe they don't disappear entirely. Maybe they just become passengers, trapped in an eternal ride they can't escape from. Marcus went pale. That's worse than vanishing. At least vanishing suggests an end. This would be forever. Just sitting there, watching the road scroll past, unable to speak or move or do anything except exist. Over the following weeks, we started paying closer attention to the hitchhiker phenomenon. Once you knew to look for them, you saw them everywhere. Late-night truckers pulling in with silent passengers. Cars with figures in the back seat that the drivers never acknowledged. Even the occasional motorcycle with a second person clinging to the driver, visible to us, but not to the person giving them a ride. What disturbed me most was realizing I'd been seeing them all along, but dismissing them as normal passengers. It was only when Marcus pointed out that first one, only when I really looked, that I understood they were something else. How many had I sold coffee to? How many times had I rung up purchases while one of these silent figures stood behind the customer, invisible to them, but watching me with empty eyes? We started documenting them, taking notes on patterns. The silent hitchhikers appeared most frequently between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. They were always dressed in dark, nondescript clothing. They never moved except when a vehicle they were in moved. They cast shadows but didn't appear on security cameras. We checked, and most disturbingly, they were becoming more common. Whereas I might have seen 1 or 2 a week when I first started, by December we were seeing 3 or 4 per night. They're increasing. Marcus observed one night, reviewing our notes, like they're gathering for something, or multiplying. That's when we decided to try something that, in retrospect, was probably incredibly stupid. We decided to try to communicate with one. The opportunity came on a frigid night in mid-December. A trucker pulled in around 2:30 a.m. with a silent passenger clearly visible in his cab, while Marcus kept the driver distracted inside, engaging him in conversation about weather and road conditions. I slipped outside and approached the truck. Up close, the figure was even more disturbing. It was definitely male, or had been once, wearing jeans and a plain dark jacket. His hands were folded in his lap, and his face was turned toward the windshield, but I couldn't quite make out his features. It was like my eyes refused to focus on them, sliding off whenever I tried to look directly at his face. "Can you hear me?" I asked quietly, standing just outside the passenger window. The figure didn't respond, didn't move, but I felt something, a subtle shift in the air pressure, a sense of attention turning toward me. "If you can hear me, if you understand me," blinked twice. Nothing, just that continued stillness. But now I was certain it was aware of me. I could feel its attention like weight, like being watched by something vast and patient and unknowable. "Were you a driver once?" I tried again. "Did you work these routes? Did something happen to you?" This time, there was a response. The figure's head turned, slowly, mechanically, until it was facing me. And even though I still couldn't see its features clearly, couldn't make out the details of its face, I knew it was looking directly at me, into me. Then it smiled. I didn't see the smile so much as sense it, a stretching of darkness, an expression of something that might have been amusement or malice or hunger. And in my head, clear as if someone had spoken directly into my ear, I heard a single word. Soon, I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. The figure slowly turned back to face forward, resuming its vigil of the road ahead. Inside the store, I could see the driver finishing his transaction, getting ready to leave. I hurried back inside, brushing past the driver as he headed out, and grabbed Marcus's arm. "We need to stop trying to communicate with them," I said urgently. "That was a mistake, a bad mistake." Marcus looked at me, saw something in my face that made him nod without asking questions. We watched through the window as the trucker climbed back into his cab, settled into his seat beside the silent passenger, and drove away into the night. "What happened?" Marcus asked once the truck was gone. I told him about the single word, about the way it had felt to have that thing's attention focused on me. "I think they're waiting," I said, "waiting for something. And I think whatever they're waiting for, We're not going to like it when it arrives. That night marked a shift in our understanding. We've been thinking of the silent hitchhikers as passive, as observers, or trapped souls. But that word, soon, suggested something else. It suggested intention, purpose, a plan unfolding according to some timeline we didn't understand. The cold spot phenomenon was different from the hitchhikers, but equally unsettling in its own way. It was localized to Pump 4 Crossroads Junction, and it had been there since long before I started working. Raymond knew about it. Every worker knew about it. But nobody knew why it existed or what caused it. The temperature around Pump 4 was always at least 20 degrees colder than the surrounding air, regardless of the weather. In summer, you could feel it from 15 feet away, a bubble of refrigerated air that made no physical sense. In winter, it was worse. The concrete around Pump 4 would be covered in frost, even when everywhere else was dry. Windows of cars parked there would ice over within minutes, and anyone who stood near it for too long would start shivering uncontrollably, their lips turning blue, their fingers going numb. We'd rerouted customers away from Pump 4 when possible, claiming it was out of order or under maintenance. But sometimes people insisted on using it, especially during busy hours when the other pumps were occupied. Those customers always came inside afterward, rubbing their arms and complaining about the unexpected cold. Marcus became obsessed with a cold spot. He'd stand near it during slow periods, timing how long he could endure the temperature drop, taking measurements with a thermometer, trying to find some pattern or explanation. I warned him against it, reminded him that curiosity had killed plenty of workers before us. But he insisted he was being careful. There's got to be a reason for it, he'd say. Cold doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Either it's a natural phenomenon, underground water, unusual air currents, something, or it's paranormal. And if it's paranormal, there might be a way to understand it, to control it, or to make it worse. I countered. What if investigating it draws attention to us? What if whatever causes that cold spot doesn't want to be studied? But Marcus couldn't let it go. And honestly, I understood the compulsion. When you're surrounded by inexplicable phenomena, when you're following rules you don't understand to avoid consequences you can't predict, the temptation to find just one answer, to solve just one mystery, becomes almost overwhelming. It feels like maybe if you can understand just one thing about this place, you can start to gain some control over it. The incident happened on Christmas Eve of all nights. The highway was quiet, most long-haul truckers having taken the holiday off or stopped for the night at larger facilities with better amenities. Marcus and I were essentially alone, just us and the darkness and the vast, empty expanse of Texas stretching out in all directions. Around midnight, Marcus announced he was going outside to take more readings of the cold spot. I tried to talk him out of it, but he was determined. He'd brought specialized equipment this time. Thermal imaging camera, electromagnetic field detector, things he'd borrowed from a friend who investigated paranormal activity as a hobby. Just give me 20 minutes, he said, already heading for the door. I'll stay within sight of the windows. You keep an eye on me, and if anything seems wrong, come get me immediately. I watched from inside as he set up his equipment around Pump 4. Even from the warmth of the store, I could see the vapor of his breath thickening, see him pull his jacket tighter. The thermal imaging camera's screen glowed blue-green in the darkness. He was taking measurements, recording data, circling the pump slowly. 15 minutes in, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The frost around Pump 4 was spreading. Slowly but visibly, ice crystals were creeping outward across the concrete, creating geometric patterns that looked almost intentional. And in the center of it all, Marcus had stopped moving. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. Marcus, we need to go back inside. Now. He didn't respond. He was standing perfectly still, staring down at the ground around his feet. As I got closer, I could see why. The frost had formed shapes. Not random patterns, but actual shapes. Letters. Words. They spelled out a message in crystalline ice. Help US. We're so cold. Please help US. Marcus, step back from there, I said urgently, grabbing his arm. His skin was ice cold, even through his jacket. Whatever this is, we can't help it. We need to follow the rules. But they're asking for help, he said, his voice distant, dreamy. There are people down there, Daniel. Trapped. Cold. They've been cold for so long. I can feel them. Can't you feel them? I pulled harder on his arm, trying to drag him away from the pump, but he resisted. His eyes were unfocused, and I realized with horror that he was going into hypothermia. His core body temperature was dropping despite the layers of clothing, despite the fact that we were in Texas in late December, not the Arctic. More words were forming in the frost. Warm US. Give US your heat. Just for a moment. Please. No, I said firmly, both to Marcus and to whatever was beneath Pump 4. No deals. No exchanges. We're going inside. Now. I used every ounce of strength I had to pull Marcus backward, away from the cold spot. He stumbled, nearly falling, and for a moment his eyes cleared. He looked at me with sudden terror, understanding flooding back. Daniel, I could feel it pulling at me, trying to draw out my body heat, my life, everything warm about me. We got inside, and I wrapped him in emergency blankets, cranked the heater up as high as it would go, made him drink hot coffee until color started returning to his face. Outside, the frost around Pump 4 had retreated to its normal radius, and the words had vanished. But now we knew what it was. Or at least, we knew what it wanted. There are things trapped there. Marcus said once he could speak without his teeth chattering. I don't know if they're human or were human once, but they're stuck somehow, frozen, and they're desperate for warmth, for life. If I'd stayed much longer, I think I would have become one of them. Another cold thing trapped beneath the concrete, calling out to anyone who got close enough to hear. We covered Pump 4 with traffic cones and caution tape after that, declared it permanently out of order. The company didn't question it. They learned not to ask too many questions about the overnight operations. And if customers complained about the inconvenience, well, that was better than losing them to whatever waited beneath that spot of perpetual cold. But the incident had shaken both of us badly, and it raised a terrifying question. How many of these truck stops sat on top of similar traps? How many innocent-seeming patches of concrete or stretches of parking lot were actually doorways to something hungry and patient and waiting? The combination of the silent hitchhikers increasing and Marcus's near miss at Pump 4 marked a turning point. We started noticing connections we'd missed before, patterns linking the different phenomena we'd been treating as separate incidents. The silent hitchhikers appeared most frequently around areas where cold spots had been reported, even if the cold spots had since disappeared. The vanishing truckers asked their question about the years specifically at locations where time seemed to work differently, where shifts felt longer or shorter than they should, where workers reported losing hours or gaining them inexplicably. The singing from storage rooms only occurred in buildings that had been constructed on certain types of land, old crossroads, former grave sites, places where the indigenous peoples had recorded unusual spiritual activity. It's like a map, Marcus said one night, spreading out our notes across the counter. All these different phenomena, they're not random. They're markers, signs pointing to places where the barrier between our world and somewhere else is thin. And the truck stops are built on these locations deliberately. I added, understanding dawning. That's why the company has all these rules. They know what these places are. They've always known. We decided to confront Raymond with our theory during his next visit. We showed him our documentation, our patterns, our evidence. He listened without interrupting, his weathered face unreadable. When we finished, he was quiet for a long time. You're smarter than most, he finally said. Took you less than 4 months to figure out what took me 3 years. Yes, the company knows, has always known. These locations aren't accidents. They're strategic. Truck stops need to be built in specific places along highways. And a lot of those places happen to be thin spots. Places where reality gets flexible. Why? I demanded. Why deliberately put businesses on haunted ground? Why employ people to work in places you know are dangerous? Raymond lit his cigarette, his hands steady despite the weight of what he was about to reveal. Because someone has to man the gates, Daniel. Someone has to keep watch over these thin places. If we don't put truck stops here, with workers who follow the rules, these locations become worse. They become true doorways, unmonitored, unguarded. The rules aren't just to protect you. They're to protect everyone. Every person who drives past these locations, every trucker who stops for gas, every family on a road trip. The rules keep the barriers intact. They maintain the boundary. So we're not just employees, Marcus said slowly. We're gatekeepers, wardens. Exactly. And the pay is good because the job is dangerous. Because it takes a toll on everyone who does it. Because eventually, everyone who works here either quits or he trailed off or becomes part of what they're guarding against. I finished. Like Jack, like all the others who disappeared. Raymond nodded. The places claim people eventually. That's the price of keeping them in check. We try to rotate workers frequently, keep anyone from staying too long, but some people need the money too badly to leave when they should. And some people get curious, start breaking rules, trying to understand instead of just following. Those are the ones who get taken fastest. I thought about my doppelganger, about the thing that had worn my face and spoken in my voice, about the 3 months I promised myself I'd stay. How long do I have? I asked quietly, before this place claims me. Raymond studied me with those eyes that had seen too much. Hard to say. You've already seen signs, the memory inconsistencies, the encounter with your double. But you're still here, still yourself. That means you're fighting it, staying grounded. If you quit now, walk away today, you'd probably be fine. Give it another 3 months. He shook his head. I can't promise anything. Marcus and I looked at each other. We both knew we should quit immediately. We both knew that every shift we worked from here on out was borrowing time we might not have. But we also both knew we wouldn't leave. Not yet. We were trapped by our own circumstances, by the invisible chains of debt and desperation that had brought us here in the first place. Then teach us everything, I said. Every rule, every trick, every piece of knowledge you have about surviving these places. If we're going to stay, we're going to do it smart. Over the next few weeks, Raymond became our teacher. He showed us things that weren't in the official rules, survival strategies passed down through generations of night shift workers. How to ground yourself by carrying something from your normal life, a photo, a meaningful object, something that reminded you who you were. How to recognize when reality was slipping, when you're starting to lose yourself to the place. The importance of maintaining human connections, of not isolating yourself completely in the darkness. He also told us about the hierarchy of phenomena, the things to avoid at all costs versus the things that were relatively safe. The silent hitchhikers, for instance, were mostly harmless as long as you didn't engage with them. They were observers, witnesses, caught in an eternal loop, but not actively malicious. The vanishing truckers were more dangerous because they could pull you into their loop if you weren't careful. But the things in the storage rooms, the entities that sang or called your name, those were predators. Active, intelligent, hungry. The worst ones are the ones that can talk to you, Raymond explained. The ones that sound human, that know your name, that can mimic voices you recognize. Those are the ones that hunt. They're patient, and they learn fast, and they'll use everything you love against you if you give them the chance. Christmas came and went. New Year's passed. January arrived with cold winds and clear skies, and I found myself still working at Crossroads Junction, still following the rules, still surviving shift after shift. My daughter's surgery was scheduled for March 15th. Just 2 more months. 2 more months of walking the knife's edge between the human world and whatever existed in the spaces between. But the phenomena were escalating. The silent hitchhikers were now appearing in clusters, 3 or 4 passengers in vehicles meant for one driver. The cold spot at Pump 4 had started spreading despite our barriers, and we were finding new cold spots appearing at other pumps. The singing from the storage room was louder, more frequent, and I'd started recognizing some of the voices. Workers who quit months ago, or who we thought had quit. One night in late January, a trucker pulled in who changed everything. He was an older man, maybe 70, with a face carved by wind and sun and decades on the road. He came inside, bought his coffee and snacks, and then he did something unexpected. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You're one of the gate workers, aren't you?" I froze. We never called ourselves that openly, never acknowledged what we really did. "I don't know what you mean," I said carefully. He smiled sadly. "Son, I've been driving these routes for 40 years. I know what happens at these stops. I know what you people do here, the rules you follow, the things you deal with. And I want you to know that we appreciate it. The drivers who've been around long enough to understand. We know you're keeping us safe. We know the cost. Then you know we can't talk about it." I replied, glancing at Marcus, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. "I know, but I also know things are getting worse. The phenomena are increasing, becoming more aggressive. I've seen it happening up and down Highway 83, at every stop from Laredo to Abilene. Something's changing, something big." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's talk among the old-timers. Stories about a convergence, a time when all the thin places align and the barriers fail completely. Some say it happens every century. Some say it's never happened before and never will. But everyone agrees on one thing. If it does happen, the gatekeepers are the first line of defense, and the first ones to fall." He paid for his purchases and left, driving back out onto the highway with 2 silent hitchhikers visible in his cab. Marcus and I stood in silence for a long moment after he was gone. "Do you think he's right?" Marcus finally asked. "About a convergence? I don't know," I admitted, "but I know things are getting worse. We both know it. The question is, what do we do about it?" The answer came faster than we expected. 3 nights later, at exactly 3:17 a.m., something different happened during the locked door ritual. We prepared as always. Lights off, door locked, both of us positioned away from the windows. But this time, the sounds outside were different. Not the usual footsteps and scraping and voices calling our names. This time, it was silent. Completely, absolutely silent. And somehow that was worse. Then the door handle began to turn, slowly, deliberately, testing the lock. We'd never seen that happen before. The things outside had always respected the barrier of the locked door, had only knocked and called but never tried to force entry. This was new. This was escalating. The handle stopped turning. For 1 heartbeat, 2, nothing happened. Then every window in the building shattered simultaneously, glass exploding inward in a glittering cascade. The cold spot from Pump 4 rushed in through the broken windows, dropping the temperature by 50 degrees in seconds. And through the opening where the front window had been, things began to climb inside. I saw the silent hitchhikers first, dozens of them, moving with sudden purpose instead of their usual stillness. Behind them came others, figures made of frost and shadow, entities that hurt to look at directly, shapes that defied geometry and sanity. And leading them all was something tall and familiar, something wearing my face but wrong, too pale, too perfect, too empty. "Hello, Daniel," my doppelganger said in my voice. "I told you I'd see you again soon. It's time to trade places. You've served your purpose. You've kept the gate open just long enough." Marcus grabbed my arm. "The safe room. Now." We ran, but the things were faster. They flowed through the shattered windows like water, filling the store with their presence. I felt hands, cold hands, too many hands, grabbing at me, trying to pull me down. Marcus was shouting something, the words lost in the chaos. We made it to the back room, but the safe room door was already open. Someone was standing in it. Jack Thornton, or would have been Jack Thornton. His skin was pale as paper, his eyes empty as the hitchhiker's. And when he smiled at us, his mouth opened too wide. "There's nowhere to hide anymore," he said in a voice that echoed with dozens of other voices, other lost workers, other gatekeepers who'd failed. "The convergence is here. The barriers are falling, and we're finally going home." Behind us, the things were closing in. Ahead of us, Jack blocked the only shelter. And I realized, in that moment of perfect clarity, that Raymond had been right. I'd stayed too long. We both stayed too long. And now we were going to pay the price. Marcus looked at me, and I saw the terror in his eyes matched by something else. Determination. He'd been an EMT once. He'd saved lives. And he wasn't going to stop now. "The mirrors," he said urgently. "The mirrors reflect them. Show what they really are. If we uncover all the mirrors at once, break the rule completely, maybe it'll disrupt them. Give us a chance." It was insane. Breaking the mirror rule would probably kill us just as surely as the things closing in. But it was the only option we had left. "Do it," I said. We split up, running in opposite directions, tearing down the cloths, covering every reflective surface we could find. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The mirrors showed not just the entities, but the truth behind them. Writhing masses of darkness and hunger. Things that had once been human twisted into nightmare shapes. Souls trapped and consumed and repurposed into something alien. The entities recoiled, screaming with voices that shattered the remaining glass in the building. My doppelganger's face flickered, revealing something beneath that made my sanity crack at the edges. Jack stumbled backward, his false human appearance dissolving like smoke. In the chaos, Marcus grabbed my hand. "The highway. Run for the highway. Cross the road line. They can't follow past the painted boundary. That's one of the rules that still holds." We ran through the shattered store, through the grasping hands and screaming voices, through things that clawed at our clothes and hair. Ran out into the parking lot where Pump 4 had become a vortex of cold, ice and frost spiraling up into the night sky. Ran past the silent hitchhikers who watched us with their empty eyes, past the vanishing truckers who called out questions we couldn't answer, past all the collected nightmares of Highway 83. The highway stretched before us, for lanes of asphalt painted with reflective lines that glowed in the darkness. We reached the edge, and I looked back one last time. The crossroad junction was consumed with entities, things pouring out of it like smoke from a fire. But they stopped at the parking lot's edge, held back by some invisible barrier, unable to cross onto the highway proper. We collapsed on the far side of the road, gasping for breath, watching as the truck stopped we'd worked and was reclaimed by the darkness. Gradually, impossibly, the building began to fade. Not destroyed, but becoming less real, less substantial, shifting from the concrete world into something else, somewhere else. By the time the sun rose, there was nothing left but an empty lot with cracked concrete and overgrown weeds, as if Crossroads Junction had never existed at all. The authorities found us on the side of Highway 83 at dawn. 2 men in torn clothes babbling about ghosts and monsters and truck stops that disappeared. They assumed we were on drugs or suffering from exposure-induced hallucinations. Marcus and I didn't argue. What could we say? That we'd been gatekeepers for a thin place in reality, and we'd failed? That we'd unleashed something terrible by staying too long, by letting ourselves become too connected to the darkness? They took us to a hospital in Laredo. We were dehydrated, suffering from minor hypothermia despite the relatively mild temperatures, and covered in cuts from the shattered glass. The attending physician wanted to keep us for psychiatric evaluation, but we checked ourselves out against medical advice as soon as we could walk without assistance. Raymond met us outside the hospital. He looked older than I remembered, ancient and tired, like something vital had been drained out of him. "I heard," he said simply. "Crossroad Junction is gone. The company's scrambling to figure out what happened. But I know. The convergence came early. And it started with you too. We broke the mirror rule," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "We had no choice. They were going to take us." "I know," Raymond replied. "And you survived, which is more than most people can say when a convergence happens. But you need to understand something. It's not over. Crossroad Junction was just one location, one thin place. There are hundreds of them up and down these highways. And if one fell, the others are vulnerable. The barriers are weak right now. Things that should stay hidden are pushing through. And there aren't enough gatekeepers left to hold them back." "I'm done," I said firmly. "I quit. I don't care about the money anymore. I'll find another way to pay for my daughter's surgery. This job, this place, it's not worth my soul." Raymond nodded slowly. "That's probably wise. You've seen too much, become too connected. Staying would definitely destroy you now." "But Marcus," he turned to my partner, "you're different. You haven't been marked the same way Daniel has. You could still work, still help. We need people, now more than ever." Marcus looked at me, then back at Raymond. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He'd seen the horrors, knew the dangers, but he also had his own debts, his own desperation. And more than that, I could see something else in his expression, a sense of responsibility, of understanding that someone had to stand guard, had to maintain the barriers, even knowing the cost. "I'll do it," he said quietly, "but only at the newer locations, the ones that aren't as deep. And I want every piece of information you have about the convergence, about what's coming. If I'm going to risk my life for this, I'm going to do it informed." Raymond agreed, and they made arrangements for Marcus to transfer to a location near Austin, one of the safer spots. I gave him my documentation, all the notes and observations I collected over the past months. "Don't stay too long," I warned him. "Don't make my mistake. Get in, earn what you need, and get out before it claims you." He promised he would. We both knew he was probably lying. I went home to my apartment for the first time in what felt like years. Everything looked wrong, too bright, too solid, too real after months in the liminal spaces of truck stops at night. I couldn't sleep in complete darkness anymore. I kept seeing things in the corners, kept hearing voices calling my name. So I left the lights on and tried to convince myself I was safe now, that I'd escaped, that I was free. The medical bills were waiting for me, accumulating interest, growing larger every day. My daughter's surgery was still scheduled for March 15th, exactly 1 month away. I'd earned enough to cover about 60% of the cost during my time at Crossroads Junction. Not enough. Not nearly enough. I tried to find other work, regular work, day shift positions that didn't involve supernatural phenomena or rules written in the blood of previous employees. But something had changed in me during those months on Highway 83. I couldn't focus during interviews, couldn't make small talk, couldn't pretend that the normal world was the only world. Potential employers saw something in my eyes, some fundamental alteration, and they always found reasons not to hire me. 2 weeks after Crossroads Junction vanished, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered it hesitantly, half expecting to hear my own voice on the other end, my doppelganger telling me it was time to complete the trade. It was Raymond. "Daniel, I need to tell you something. It's about your daughter's surgery. The company has a fund, a discretionary account for workers who've encountered difficulties. I've authorized a payment to cover the rest of your daughter's medical expenses. The surgery will proceed as scheduled, fully paid." I couldn't speak for a moment. "Why?" I finally managed. "Why would they do that?" "Because you served your purpose," Raymond said, and there was something heavy in his voice, something like guilt. "You kept the gate at Crossroads Junction for 4 months. That's 4 months of protection for everyone who used that highway. And when the convergence came, you made a choice that prevented something much worse. Breaking the mirror rule disrupted the entities enough that they consumed the location itself instead of spreading outward. You sacrificed the truck stop to save the highway. That's worth something. You're saying I was supposed to break the rules? That was the plan all along. Not a plan. More like acceptable outcomes. Sometimes the only way to stop a convergence is to let it consume the thin place completely, close it off from both sides. We'd hoped to have more warning, to evacuate you first, but things moved faster than anticipated. The fact that you survived is remarkable. The fact that you had the presence of mind to make the choice you did is why you're being compensated. I should have felt grateful. Should have been relieved that my daughter's surgery would happen, that the crushing weight of medical debt was being lifted. But instead, I felt used, manipulated, like I'd been a piece in a game I never understood, moved around a board according to rules I'd never been told. Were any of the rules real? I asked. Or were they just theater, things to keep us busy while we served whatever purpose you needed? The rules are real, Raymond said firmly. They protect workers most of the time. But sometimes, in rare cases, the only way to win is to break them at exactly the right moment. You and Marcus did that. You saved lives. That should mean something. He hung up before I could respond. I sat in my two-bed apartment, surrounded by normalcy I no longer felt part of, and wondered if I'd made the right choices. If there even were right choices when dealing with forces beyond human comprehension. My daughter's surgery happened on schedule. It was successful. The doctors said she'd make a full recovery, that she'd be able to live a normal, healthy life. When I saw her in the recovery room, smiling despite the pain medication, telling me about the nice nurses and the boring TV shows she'd watched, I knew that whatever price I'd paid had been worth it. But the nightmares didn't stop. Every night, I dreamed of highways stretching into infinity, of Pump 4's cold spreading across the landscape, of my doppelganger standing at the foot of my bed, waiting patiently for me to fall asleep deep enough that we could make the trade. I dreamed of Jack Thornton's smile and the singing from storage rooms and the silent hitchhikers gathering in greater numbers, preparing for something I couldn't understand. Marcus called me occasionally, checking in, sharing updates from his new location. Things were bad all along Highway 83, he reported. Multiple truck stops experiencing increased phenomena. Workers quitting at unprecedented rates. The company struggling to maintain coverage of the thin places. And always, the sense that something larger was building. That Crossroads Junction had been just the beginning. They're organizing, he told me during one call in late March. The entities, they're coordinating across locations, learning from what happened at your place. The silent hitchhikers are the scouts, we think. They're mapping the thin places, finding the weakest points. And there are more convergences coming. Small ones so far, but growing. Get out, I told him. Marcus, seriously, walk away before it's too late. I can't, he said simply. Someone has to hold the line. And I've learned things, Daniel. Things that might help. Ways to strengthen the barriers. New rules that seem to work. If I quit now, if everyone quits, these places won't just claim individual workers. They'll claim entire highways. Towns. Maybe more. I wanted to argue with him. To convince him he was throwing his life away for a cause he couldn't win. But I understood. I'd felt that same pull. That sense of responsibility to stand between the darkness and the unsuspecting people traveling these roads. The only difference was that fear had driven me away before duty could fully claim me. Be careful, I said instead. And if you ever see yourself, your doppelganger, don't engage with it. Run. Just run. I will, he promised. That was the last time I spoke to him. 3 weeks later, I got a call from Raymond. Marcus had disappeared during his shift. His car was found in the parking lot. Keys in the ignition, door open, just like all the others before him. I attended what passed for a memorial service, though there was no body to bury. A few company representatives were there, some other workers I didn't recognize, and Raymond. We didn't talk about what had really happened. How could we? Instead, we shared generic stories about Marcus's competence and professionalism, pretended he'd been the victim of some random crime or accident, and went our separate ways. But I knew the truth. Marcus had been claimed by the thin places he'd tried to protect. He'd become another voice in the singing, another silent passenger in the endless convoy of the lost. And part of me wondered if that was always the inevitable end for anyone who worked these jobs. If we were all just delaying the inevitable, fighting a war we could never win, slowly transforming from gatekeepers into what we guarded against. Months passed. Summer came to Texas, bringing heat that shimmered on the highways and made the air thick enough to choke on. I found work eventually, a boring day shift position at a warehouse in San Antonio, far from any major highways. The pay was terrible compared to what I'd earned at Crossroads Junction, but I slept better at night. Mostly, my daughter recovered fully, started school again, made friends, built a life that would never include knowledge of the thin places and the things that waited in them. That was worth everything I'd endured. But I couldn't completely escape. I'd drive sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, and I'd find myself on Highway 83. Not intentionally. I'd start out heading somewhere else, somewhere safe and well-lit, but somehow I'd end up on that familiar stretch of road. And I'd see them, the truck stops that shouldn't be there, the locations that appeared only to certain people at certain times, the gatekeepers working their shifts, following their rules, not yet understanding what they'd signed up for. I wanted to warn them, wanted to pull over and tell every night shift worker I saw that they should quit immediately, that no amount of money was worth what this job would take from them. But I never did, because some part of me understood that they needed to learn these lessons themselves, the same way I had. And because, despite everything, I knew that someone had to stand watch. Someone had to maintain the barriers, follow the rules, keep the thin places from spreading. The gatekeepers were doomed, but they were also necessary. And that paradox was more terrible than anything I'd encountered in the darkness. One night in October, almost exactly a year after I'd started working at Crossroads Junction, I was driving home from a late shift at the warehouse. I wasn't on Highway 83. I was on Interstate 10, heading east toward San Antonio, surrounded by other cars and trucks, and the comforting illusion of normalcy. That's when I saw it. In the passenger seat of a semi-truck passing me, sitting perfectly still, facing forward, was a silent hitchhiker. But this one was different. This one had a face I recognized. Marcus, or would have been Marcus. He sat in that truck cab, silent and still, eyes empty, trapped in an eternal journey he couldn't escape. And as the truck passed me, as I stared in horror, he turned his head, looked directly at me, and smiled. It wasn't a human smile. It was recognition, understanding, welcome. The message was clear. I wasn't free. I'd never be free. Whatever transformation had begun during my months at Crossroads Junction was still progressing, still changing me, still pulling me toward the thin places. Eventually, I would return to them, or they would come for me. Either way, the gatekeepers never truly retired. They just changed forms. I pulled over to the shoulder, hands shaking, and watched the truck disappear into the night. Other vehicles passed me, and I started counting the silent passengers. 3 in the next truck, 2 in the car after that, 5 in the bus. They were everywhere once you knew to look for them. An army of the lost, traveling the highways eternally, waiting for the next convergence, the next moment when the barriers would fail completely. And somewhere out there, I knew my doppelganger was still waiting, still patient, still knowing that eventually we'd meet again, that the trade we'd started would be completed, that I'd take my place among the silent hitchhikers, another soul trapped between worlds, another gatekeeper who'd served their purpose and been repurposed. But not yet. Not tonight. I pulled back onto the highway and drove home to my daughter, to my normal life, to the illusion of safety that I'd purchased with months of terror and the sacrifice of my peace of mind. I would hold on to it as long as I could, would pretend I was free, that I'd escaped, that the thin places had no more claim on me. Because the alternative, accepting that I was already lost, already changing, already becoming something else, was too terrible to contemplate. So I follow my new rules. Stay away from Highway 83. Avoid working night shifts. Keep the lights on after dark. Carry my daughter's photo everywhere. A talisman reminding me who I was and why I'd survived. And most importantly, never, ever acknowledge the silent passengers I saw in passing vehicles. Never let them know I could see them. Because if I acknowledged them, if I engaged with them, I'd be admitting that I was already one of them. Already between worlds. Already lost. And I wasn't ready to accept that truth. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But deep down, in the part of myself that had been permanently altered by those months on a night shift, I knew the truth. The thin places never let go of their gatekeepers. They just gave them longer leashes, let them pretend to freedom for a while, before slowly, inevitably, reeling them back in. The rules had kept me alive, but they'd also marked me, changed me, claimed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. And someday, when the next convergence came, and it would come, Raymond had promised that I would have a choice to make. Stay hidden in my false safety and let others fight and fall in my place. Or return to the thin places, take up the mantle of gatekeeper once more, and finally complete the transformation I'd begun. It wasn't much of a choice. But then again, it never had been. The truck stops of Highway 83 keep operating, night after night, their lights burning in the darkness. New workers take the shifts, follow the rules, serve their time as gatekeepers. Some quit before the places can claim them. Most don't. And somewhere out there, on an endless highway under starless skies, my doppelganger is driving, wearing my face, speaking with my voice, waiting patiently for the night when I finally accept what I've become. The thing about working the night shift at haunted truck stops is this. The rules can keep you alive, but they can't keep you human. That's the real price. That's the cost no one tells you about when you sign up for triple pay and overnight shifts in the liminal spaces of America's highways. You survive. You follow the rules. You make it out alive, but you never make it out unchanged. And late at night, when I can't sleep, I sometimes find myself missing it. The clarity of the rules, the purpose of standing watch, the strange camaraderie of other gatekeepers who understood what the darkness held, the feeling of being part of something larger, even if that something was terrible and hungry and ancient. That's how they really get you, I've realized. Not through force or fear, but through meaning. Through the seductive promise that your suffering serves a purpose, that your sacrifice protects others, that your transformation is noble rather than tragic. Maybe it is. Maybe the gatekeepers are heroes, standing between humanity and the hungry things in the darkness. Maybe we should honor their sacrifice rather than mourn their loss. Or maybe we're all just victims of forces we never understood, following rules we never questioned, serving purposes we never agreed to. I don't know the answer. I'm not sure anyone does. But I know this. If you ever find yourself driving late at night on a lonely Texas highway, and you see a truck stop with flickering lights and too few cars, don't stop there. Keep driving. Find somewhere else, somewhere brighter, somewhere more real. Because those places are hungry, and they're always looking for their next gatekeeper. And if you absolutely must stop, if you have no choice, if your tank is empty and your eyes are closing, and that truck stop is the only option for 100 miles in any direction, then listen carefully. Follow the rules. All of them, even the ones that don't make sense. Especially those. Don't acknowledge the lights in the distance. Lock the door at 3:17 a.m. and don't look outside. Cover the mirrors between 2 and 5 a.m. Never answer when someone asks what year it is. Don't investigate the singing. And if you see yourself, your exact double, standing in the parking lot or sitting in a vehicle or reflected in glass that should show empty space, run. Don't ask questions. Don't try to understand. Just run, and don't stop running until you're far away from that place, that highway, That thin spot in reality where the barriers have worn too thin. Because the rules can protect you from many things, but they can't protect you from yourself, from a version of you that's already been claimed, that's waiting patiently to make the trade, that knows exactly what you're afraid of and what you love and how to use both against you. That's the secret they don't tell you when you sign up. The greatest danger isn't the entities or the phenomena or the things that lurk in storage rooms and cold spots. The greatest danger is you, the you that this place will make you become. It's been 2 years now since I left Crossroads Junction. 2 years since I watched Marcus disappear into the same darkness that had claimed Jack and so many others. 2 years of trying to build a normal life, of pretending the thin places have no more claim on me. My daughter is thriving. Her surgery was completely successful, and she's healthy and happy and blissfully ignorant of what I sacrificed to pay for her treatment. That's how it should be. Children shouldn't carry the weight of their parents' choices, shouldn't know about the darkness that surrounds their bright, innocent world. But sometimes, late at night, she wakes up crying, says she had a dream about a man who looked like me, but wasn't me. A man with my face, but empty eyes, who stood at the foot of her bed and smiled with too many teeth. I comfort her, tell her it was just a nightmare, promise her she's safe. But I know the truth. My doppelganger isn't just waiting for me. It's watching everyone I love, studying them, learning them, preparing for the day when it can use them as leverage. Because that's what these things do. They're patient, they're thorough, and they always collect what's owed to them. I've started seeing Raymond's name in the obituaries. He died last week, they said. Heart attack, sudden and unexpected. The funeral was private, immediate family only. But I knew better. I got a text from him 3 days before his death. Just 3 words. It's almost time. He'd known, had felt the convergence building, had understood that his years of gatekeeping were finally catching up to him. And he'd chosen to go out on his own terms, quickly, before the thin places could claim him the way they'd claimed so many others. I envied him that choice, that control, that dignity. The text messages from unknown numbers have started. They come at 3:17 a.m., always, without fail. Sometimes they're just my name. Sometimes they're longer. The barriers are failing. We need you. Come back. It's time to finish what you started. I don't respond, but I don't block the numbers either. Because some part of me, the part that was marked and changed and claimed during those months on Highway 83, wants to know what's happening. Needs to know. Can't let go of the connection to that world of rules and darkness and thin places. Last week, I drove past where Crossroads Junction used to be. The empty lot is still there, overgrown and abandoned. But something's changed. There are tire tracks in the weeds now, fresh ones, leading to where the pumps used to be. And in the center of the lot, someone has spray-painted words on the cracked concrete. The gatekeepers are failing. The barriers are breaking. The convergence comes. I should have kept driving. Should have left that message for someone else to find, someone else to decipher. But I got out of my car, walked onto that cursed ground, stood where pump 4 had been and felt the cold that still lingered there, weaker now, but present, waiting. And I heard singing, faint and distant, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. A chorus of voices I recognized. Jack, Marcus, Raymond, and dozens of others. All the lost gatekeepers, all the claimed souls, calling to me, welcoming me, telling me it was time to come home. I ran back to my car, drove away as fast as I could, but I could still hear them, even miles down the road, even after I'd crossed 3 county lines and put 100 miles between myself and that empty lot. The singing followed me, a thread connecting me to the thin places I'd tried to escape. That was 3 days ago, and every night since, I've dreamed of highways. Endless roads under starless skies, truck stops that appear and disappear like mirages, and a version of myself driving toward me from the opposite direction, getting closer each night. Almost here now. I know it's coming. The choice I've been delaying for 2 years is finally here. The thin places are weakening, the barriers are failing, and a convergence is building that will make Crossroads Junction look like a minor incident. And there aren't enough gatekeepers left to stop it. I could run, take my daughter, and flee as far from Highway 83 as possible. Change our names, start over somewhere far away, pretend none of this ever happened. Some people do that. Raymond told me about them once. The ones who escaped and stayed escaped by cutting all ties, burning all bridges, refusing to ever look back. But I know I won't do that, because I've seen the silent hitchhikers. I've seen the vanishing truckers. I've seen what happens when the thin places aren't guarded, when the rules aren't followed, when the gatekeepers abandon their posts. Innocent people suffer. Families are torn apart. Souls are claimed and consumed and repurposed. The darkness spreads. And I have a daughter who deserves better than a world where those things can happen unchecked, where highways become hunting grounds and truck stops become traps, and the barriers between worlds collapse entirely. So I made my decision. Tomorrow night, I'm going back to Highway 83, back to the thin places, back to the work I never really left. I'm going to find whatever survivors remain among the gatekeepers, and I'm going to help them strengthen the barriers. I'm going to follow the rules and break the rules when necessary and do whatever it takes to hold the line, even if it costs me everything, especially if it costs me everything, because that's what gatekeepers do. We stand watch. We pay the price. We sacrifice ourselves so others don't have to know what lurks in the darkness. I've written this all down, this entire account of my time on Highway 83, as a warning, as a record, as a map for anyone who comes after me. The rules work, but they're not enough on their own. You need to understand what you're facing, why the rules exist, what happens when they're broken, and most importantly, you need to know when to quit, when to recognize that you've been marked, claimed, changed beyond recovery. I missed that moment. I stayed too long, let the thin places get their hooks too deep. Now I can't leave even if I wanted to. The connection is too strong, the transformation too advanced. But maybe you can learn from my mistakes. Maybe you can work these shifts, earn your money, and get out before it's too late. Maybe you can be smarter than I was, stronger than Marcus, more cautious than Jack. Or maybe you'll end up just like us. Another voice in the singing. Another silent passenger on an endless ride. Another gatekeeper who served their purpose and was consumed by it. Either way, someone has to do this work. Someone has to stand between the hungry darkness and the unsuspecting world. The thin places exist whether we acknowledge them or not. The barriers need maintaining whether we want to maintain them or not. And the rules, those strange, arbitrary, essential rules, need to be followed. So if you find yourself working the night shift at a truck stop on a lonely highway, if you're given a laminated card covered in bizarre instructions, if someone tells you to follow these rules without question, believe them. Follow every rule exactly as written. Don't try to understand. Don't get curious. Don't stay longer than absolutely necessary. And if you see yourself, your exact double, your doppelganger, your replacement waiting to take your place, don't engage. Don't acknowledge. Don't make the trade. Run. Run and never look back. Run and pray you're not already too late. Because the thin places are patient. They can wait decades or centuries for the right moment. And when that moment comes, when the convergence arrives and the barriers fail completely, they'll take everyone who ever touched them. Everyone who ever worked as a gatekeeper. Whoever followed the rules, whoever glimpsed what lurks in the spaces between, they'll take us all home. I'm writing this in my apartment at 3:16 a.m. In 1 minute, something will knock on my door. It will sound like my daughter, crying, asking me to let her in. But she's asleep in her room down the hall. I just checked. Whatever is about to knock, it's not her. It never was. The rules say don't answer the door at 3:17 a.m. Don't open it for any reason. But I'm not at a truck stop anymore. I'm home. The rules shouldn't apply here. Except they do. The thin places have spread beyond Highway 83, beyond the designated locations, beyond the boundaries we thought contained them. The convergence is here. It's everywhere. And there's nowhere left to run. The knock comes. 3 measured raps. A pause. 3 more. My daughter's voice, perfect in every detail. Daddy? Daddy, I'm scared. Please let me in. Please help me. I stand up, walk toward the door. My hand reaches for the lock. This is the moment. The choice. The final rule to break or follow. If I open this door, I complete the transformation. I accept what I've become. I take my place among the silent hitchhikers and the vanishing truckers and all the lost gatekeepers who came before me. If I don't open it, whatever is outside will find another way in. It always does. And my daughter, my real daughter, sleeping innocently down the hall, will be the one to pay the price for my cowardice. So really, it's not a choice at all. I unlock the door. I turn the handle. I whisper the only prayer I have left. I'm sorry. And I open it. To whoever finds this. My name was Daniel Reeves. I worked the night shift at truck stops along Highway 83. I followed the rules for as long as I could. When I couldn't follow them anymore, I broke them to save my daughter. It wasn't enough. The thin places claimed me 2 years and 17 days after I thought I'd escaped them. They were patient. They waited until I loved something more than I feared them. Then they used that love as a weapon. But here's what the company never tells you. What Raymond never explained. What none of the old gatekeepers understood. Breaking the rules at the right moment, in the right way, for the right reasons, that's not failure. That's the final test. The ultimate purpose of every gatekeeper. We're not meant to hold the barriers forever. We're meant to be expendable, sacrificial. The barriers are maintained not by our obedience, but by our sacrifice. Each gatekeeper who falls strengthens the walls. Each soul claimed by the thin places feeds them just enough to keep them dormant. We're not guards. We're offerings. And I finally understand why the company kept recruiting, why they never ran out of people willing to work these cursed shifts. Because somewhere, someone is always desperate enough, always needs the money badly enough, always has something they love more than they fear the darkness. That's the real horror, not the entities or the phenomena or the rules, but the system that feeds people into the darkness, one shift at a time, one desperate soul after another, maintaining the barriers through endless sacrifice. My daughter is safe. The thing that wore my face took me instead. That was the trade I made, and I'd make it again. But she'll grow up without me. She'll never know what I really did, what I really became, what price I paid for her life. That's the mercy I can give her. Ignorance, safety, a normal life. If you're reading this, you're probably working one of these shifts. You're probably following the rules, thinking they'll keep you safe. Maybe they will. Maybe you'll be one of the lucky ones who gets out before it's too late. But probably not. Probably you're already marked, already claimed, already changing into something that only looks human. Probably the best you can hope for is to choose when and how you fall, to make your sacrifice count for something. So follow the rules. Break them when you must. Protect who you can. And when the moment comes, when you're standing at that door at 3:17 a.m., hearing the voice of someone you love, knowing it's a trap, but also knowing the consequences of refusing, make the trade. Become the offering. Strengthen the barriers with your soul. That's what gatekeepers do. That's what we've always done. The truck stops will keep operating. The shifts will keep turning. The desperate will keep applying. And the thin places will keep claiming their due. This is the price of keeping the darkness at bay. This is the cost of maintaining the barriers. This is the truth they never tell you. The rules don't protect you. You protect everyone else. One sacrifice at a time. One shift at a time. Forever. Daniel Reeves, former gatekeeper. Highway 83, claimed by Crossroads Junction, October 19th, 2027. P.S. To my daughter, if you ever read this somehow, I'm sorry I couldn't stay. I'm sorry you'll grow up with questions I can't answer. But know that every night I stood watch, every rule I followed, every choice I made, it was all for you. The monsters are real, sweetheart, but so are the people who stand between them and you. So are the sacrifices made in darkness, so you can live in light. I love you. I'm sorry. And I'd do it all again. Don't come looking for me. Don't work the night shift. Don't follow the rules. Just live. Live freely. Live safely. Live without ever knowing what it cost to give you that freedom. That's all any gatekeeper ever wanted. The mirror in the rest stop bathroom, where this message was found, has been covered with cloth, as per protocol. The location has been marked for observation. New gatekeepers have been assigned. The shifts continue. The rules remain. The barriers hold. For now. Always for now. The end.